Hey, thanks for joining Spotlight on Spirit today. Today, we're going to talk about chaplains in the military. And I anticipate that this is going to be a rich topic, and it might be quite an informational topic for many. So I have with me Reverend Carleton Birch. I think you served in the military for, is it 30 years as a
Yeah, it depends how you
chaplain?
count. 31 years active, 35 years
Okay.
total.
Okay. And so you what branch did you serve in, Carleton?
I served in the Army all
Oh,
35
yay,
years.
go Army. Yes, I'm Army. And so um, there's a joke that goes around that you might have heard it that all Marine Corps need a hero. So that's the Army's role. It's not a very nice one, but I've heard it a few times. So
You're alienating most
I
of your
know.
listeners right now. You know that,
I
right?
know. I'm going to hear from some of them. And so all in good fun. But you were an Army chaplain. You're the ecclesiastical endorser for your denomination. And I just want to kind of jump in and talk a lot about who are these military chaplains, and what purpose do we serve in the military. I was an Army chaplain in the Minnesota Army National Guard from 06 to 12. And so this is near and dear to my heart too. And so you belong to the American Legion.
I do. American Legion Post 25 out of Middletown, Delaware.
Thank you for joining us, because this is the Department of Minnesota sponsored American Legion podcast. And so we are all part of the bigger family and fabric of the American Legion. American Legion has always had chaplains too. And so a lot of what we do in the American Legion has patterned itself off of the military, simply because we're serving veterans too. So the military's always had chaplains.
It has.
Yeah.
Before we were a nation, when we had a continental army, George Washington stood up chaplains as part of the army. His first general order
He had
was
to fight for it
establishment of
too.
chaplains for each regiment.
He had to fight for it too.
Yeah, because people had to come up with the money for it. He only had so much money, and it's beans and bullets, right? So
Right.
to spend some of that on chaplains, he had to have a good reason for it, and he believed that the morale of the soldiers was just as important as the beans and bullets aspect of it. So you had to train the army. First, you had to man the army. Then you had to train the army. You had to resource the army. But there's another piece of that to give them a fighting spirit and help keep that fighting spirit. And that's where chaplains came in, and still do.
Did you start out in the Army as a chaplain?
I did not. So my story is that I was minding my own business in college, and all of a sudden I felt this urge by God to do something else. I was a business major. I was going to go start a business and have my own business. But God pulled me away from that, and for whatever reason, I didn't know anything about the military, but Army chaplain just kept coming into my head. And I talked to friends who were veterans, and one of them said, "Hey, why don't you just go in and God will make it clear to you." Right. I mean, now it's a feeling, but you'll be sure once you've experienced it. So I became a field artillery surveyor, affectionately referred to in the Army as a red leg. And and I was enlisted in 1981. So
long time
that's where
ago.
I started. And then I didn't like it much at all.
The Army?
My job was going away. It's being replaced by these things called computers. Manual survey was going out the window. And and so I went to officer candidate school, and then graduated from that and served as a line officer for 3 years in Europe.
Okay. Oh my.
Before it was like, okay, God was like, okay, you've had your fun doing all this other stuff. Now remember that I called you to become an Army chaplain. So
Yeah.
I left the Army the first time and went back to school
Hmm.
to get qualified to be an Army chaplain.
A little bit. I joined the Army straight out of high school. And it was during the time when women were just up and coming into the Army, if you will. It was 10 years, a little bit beyond that from Vietnam War. So they didn't really know what to do with women. But it was exciting times. But I got out of the military, never thought about the military ever again. And like you, all of a sudden, God started, tugging on my heart, if you will.
Yeah,
And I felt that I needed to be more involved in a ministerial role. And then the military was a good fit for me, simply because I had been in the military. And once I was in the military as a chaplain, it became very clear to me why I was there, meeting those spiritual needs of all individuals and how a female could be an asset no matter the gender or the situation.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
I was always quite surprised on God's leading in my life, before I completely understood the process or the benefit. So it's more listening, I guess, is what I was hearing. It's like listening, like, I need you here. Go.
Yeah, God sometimes is pretty clear what he wants us to do. Sometimes we're a little hard-headed about listening to him.
For me, I had a lot of barriers,
Mm,
before I could hear clearly. And some of them were just the social barriers of women's place in the ministry and women's place in the military. And then just hearing, no, this is a clear calling, that I'm hearing. So chaplains in the military, have a diverse, very important role that sometimes isn't as clearly understood and has actually changed over the years.
yeah, I don't have all the statistics in front of me, but a good percentage of the military is female,
Hmm.
but a much less percentage of that are female chaplains.
Yeah.
So the military is always looking for women chaplains to serve because they're underrepresented in the military compared with the amount of service members who are women.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's serving in the military is a difficult, um, thing to do. It requires a lot of, um, contemplation on your role in this world. I found, a lot of people don't join the military, especially now after 1973, after conscription has ended. They they consider why they want to be in the military because the military could be the end of your life. Um,
Right.
so the purpose of why you are doing what you do, I have learned most people consider that. You know,
And you may be sent to do things for your government that you may not agree with, and that's always
yeah.
been a possibility. Even Vietnam,
Hmm.
there was a lot of people. There was a lot of conscripted soldiers who didn't believe in that mission,
Yeah.
but you serve anyway. You serve for the person to your left and your right.
Yeah.
A lot of times, the people that you suffer with, really.
The value of why you're doing what you're doing and who you're doing it for becomes quite clear in the
Yeah,
military. Yeah. I have always found that, the military is a very, value based organization and needs to be for a very specific reason because there are parameters, left and right boundaries, what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do, even though what you're doing is, very serious.
yeah. Society may, in some ways, have given up on right and wrong, but the military is going to tell you what's right and what's
Right.
wrong.
Right. Right from the start, too.
What you
Yes.
will and will not do. You can
Yes.
agree with me or not agree with me, but this is the way it is.
This is what we're doing. So you found yourself in this spiritual transformation from field artillery into the military ministry.
Yes.
Yes. And so can you talk a little bit about your role as a chaplain in the military?
Yeah. So now as an endorser, I have 56 military chaplains that represent my denomination, Converge, in the
Uh-huh.
military. About
Okay.
half of them are reserve component, like National Guard or Reserve, but
Mhm.
but they're split among the three services. So a lot of people don't know there's three separate chaplain corps in the military. The Army has a chaplain corps, the Navy does, and the Air Force. And then the Navy chaplains serve the Marines
Yeah.
and they serve the Coast Guard. And then now Air Force chaplains also serve the Space Force.
Okay.
So, um, so we have chaplains that are split all over the place. So I've had to become multicultural myself.
Ah.
Only during the once a year Army Navy traditional football game
Uh-huh.
do, do I have to go back to my roots in the Army. But the rest of the time, I'm
Mhm.
serving on sometimes going to Navy bases and Air Force bases and working with the Navy and working with the Air Force as well. So I love the different cultures in the
Mm.
military service. And that's one great thing about the American Legion, right? Because you all come from different military cultures,
Right.
background, but you all are veterans together. You all have this common bond of service for your country.
Yeah. We come
Um,
together and
yeah.
serve.
So
Mhm.
back to your question about a chaplain, I had this kind of idea what role I would be. First of all, every chaplain has to get religiously certified or endorsed.
Mhm.
And for me, that meant going to seminary, and it's very technical. So
It is.
you have to get a master's
Mhm.
degree of at least 70 semester hours from an accredited seminary,
Yep.
and then have at least 2 years of professional paid work experience. And
Mhm.
nowadays you have to do a funeral and you have to preach and send in a
Oh.
copy of your message, and all that's part of the application process just to become a chaplain. So I had this idea that I was going to like have be a church pastor inside the military, but that did
Ah.
not prove to be the case.
Okay.
Uh, it proved to be otherwise because most of my congregation weren't religious.
Oh,
So most of the folks in my unit weren't religious at all, and
okay.
but yet they
S-
were part of the people that would come to me, ask me
Uh-huh.
advice. They would be going through crisis, um, marriage problems, child problems, drug problems, alcohol problems, and sometimes they became hopeless and suicidal. And so a myriad of issues brought people to me. And as I interacted with them, um, these things would come up. That was the other part about being a chaplain. So not only do they come to me, but I go to them. So I
Mm.
started having to get up at 5:30 in the morning and going on the runs with them and exercising with them. And in being a lot older than they were, they didn't care, right? So
Right. Yeah,
you
they don't
have to
care.
still keep up with them,
Yep.
and no, but that's part of the great part about being an Army chaplain. You go where they go, you do kind of what they do,
Yeah.
and because of that, they're opening. Even though they know you're kind of religious,
Yeah.
they that opens them up to talking with you about all kinds of things. So that's why I think Army chaplaincy is the best thing ever.
So there's a big difference between a pastor of a church and a chaplain in general.
Yeah, a
Um,
chaplain is a specialized form of a pastor. So you have
okay.
to pretty much do all the qualifications to be a pastor,
Mm-hmm.
but then there's additional qualifications to be a
A
chaplain.
chaplain.
And
Yeah.
really a chaplain is a pastor outside the church.
Taking care of the spiritual needs.
Yeah, in the very simplest forms.
Yeah.
So and there's all kinds of chaplains. but military chaplains, they've been around for a long time.
And
Even before, there were military chaplains way before we were a country in Europe, and going back to 1700s, early 1700s in Europe. The word chaplain comes from a word that means cape. So the idea of a chaplain is a covering of support for a military member.
I have found that we don't know how to talk about the spiritual aspects of who we are. We know how to talk about the mental aspects because we have the language. We know how to talk about the physical aspects of who we are, the tangible realities of who we are. But when it comes to that spiritual piece, there's so much diversity and ambiguity, if you will. And then historically, there's been a lot of divisiveness, if you will. And that's probably a safe way to put that. But in current culture, we kind of keep clear of it. But when a chaplain is needed, everybody knows it's the chaplain that's needed. There's some line in there that it becomes clear, even though we don't know how to talk about it. Call the chaplain. The commanders would say, I needed to call you.
Yeah, I mean, these type of issues scare most commanders, right?
Yeah.
They're willing to lead people into battle, but a couple that's ready for divorce and that soldier's ready to get out of the Army because of it, a lot of times they have no idea what to do, or it could consume all of their time if they did. So, the chaplain helps commanders with those people issues that come up all the time. You're always an airman, you're always a sailor, you're always a soldier, but you're also always a person with issues, right? And so you can keep those issues out of the workplace for only so long.
Right.
And then it affects your work.
Yeah.
And it affects the unit.
Yes.
In some respects. And so that's where chaplains come in.
Chaplains, yes. So there's this unique education system called clinical pastoral education that hospital chaplains have to do. I was clinically educated in two different organizations, in the VA and then in Mayo Clinic. I have found it to be very helpful. Do military chaplains, is there a need for them to be CPE trained, is what we call it in the world?
Yeah, so the military has hospitals, and because of that, they have hospital chaplains.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of requiring chaplains to come in with CPE, they give them additional education before they serve as a hospital chaplain.
Okay.
They get that clinical pastoral education before they go serve as a hospital chaplain. So that's how but some chaplains come in with that already.
Sure.
And the services love it when applicants have that CPE qualification under their belt before they come in as well.
So military chaplains swim along with individuals struggling to define themselves or get out of situations or clarify the situation. It's not a quantitative exercise. It's more of a practice in being with somebody.
Yeah, right. It's an art and a science, both.
Yeah.
Your training comes into the science part, and the art part comes to what is that person coming to you for?
Right.
And why are they there? And the reason that they're coming to you may not be what they need. So you have to figure all that out. And then there's all these things in their background that that are like roadblocks in their lives, and sometimes you have to figure that out as well before you can help them. But it all is undergirded with this idea that a chaplain cares about the people that they're serving with.
Okay.
We call it a paraclete. A paraclete is just a Greek word for means someone who comes alongside
Okay.
and comforts someone by walking beside them, not in front of them, not behind them, but beside them. And that's really what a chaplain does. Sometimes we're older, and because of that, we've been through more stuff, and we realize that the crisis that they're going through, maybe a little bit down the road, will be a distant memory, and so we can help them through that period where it may seem like the world's falling completely apart in their lives, but we can see that for them that there's a future ahead, and we just need to walk with them through this struggle.
Yeah. We were talking before we started recording a little bit about in the military in the United States Armed Forces, there have always been individuals, and there continues to be individuals that really are not sure why chaplains need to be in the military and what is our place in being a paid person in the military is something that I know chaplains, the Chaplain Corps, has responded to. And then the second piece is we're also chaplains in the military are, what do they call it? Non-combatants. So,
right.
Yeah.
They're not allowed to carry a weapon. It's quite extraordinary in a combat zone. For those of us who've been there, it's like, oh yeah, I can't carry a weapon.
Right.
So you rely on your chaplain assistant and those around you, and God, that God's called you to serve in this place, and so you're going to go with courage and wisdom and boldness, because that's where the soldiers are going.
Mm-hmm. So there's these untangible, nebulous, vague values that define who we are, that become evident by what we do, and being paracletes, if you will, walking alongside.
Yeah, I will tell you, there's a lot of discussion about why there are chaplains.
Yeah.
But in my 25 years of being an Army chaplain, I think it comes down to this: commanders. There's commanders that have had chaplains and commanders that don't have chaplains. And some commanders never get a chaplain.
Yeah.
Commanders who have had chaplains, good chaplains, not all chaplains are good chaplains,
right,
see the value. They can't really maybe quantify it with a bunch of statistics, but they know. And as they move up in rank from company to regiment to, depending on the service, what level and layer, they're more convinced than ever the value of chaplains bring to the morale and the support of the men and women they command. So those commanders are the reason why we still have chaplain corps. I'm convinced of it.
Thank you for that. I know the Chaplain Corps has responded, also defining who they are, subject matter experts in it, specific religions, spirituality, and then the morality and the ethics is also something that chaplains can talk to and talk about.
Yeah, depending on which service. I mean, every service has a different way of explaining it, but there's really two roles of a chaplain. One is the religious role, which you represent the religious group that sent you into the military, and you perform that religion in the terms of rites, sacraments, ordinances. You lead church, so to speak. Yep. And then there's a provide piece, and that is like you're a chaplain to everybody. So there's Muslims and Jews and I tell a story about when I was a new chaplain. I got sent to Germany on my first assignment as a chaplain, and got sent to this training area in Hohenfels, Germany. And it was muddy and cold and snow and crazy. And we were living out there for 40 days and 40 nights.
Oh my.
And one night my boss came to me and he handed me these boxes and he goes, all right, you have 5 Jewish soldiers in your unit. Go find them and give them these boxes. And they were Seder kits for Passover, which is the holiest day of the Jewish calendar. Very important for Jewish soldiers. I didn't know much about Passover or Seder at the time. I just know he told me to do that. And so I remember the last box, it was like 11 o'clock at night, Passover night. I found this guy in the back of a howitzer. Howitzer is a field artillery track vehicle like a tank. And he's huddled in the corner covered by a blanket. And it's always dark, right? Because you can't use flashlights or only red LEDs flashlights. So I give this to him and he turns his little red LED flashlight on and said, it's the Seder kit. And he just got tears in his eyes and just was thanking me like that someone would remember that and take the time to go find him in the middle of nowhere and give this to him. And then fast forward 22 years later, and I'm at the Defense Logistics Agency coordinating Jewish Passover for everyone in the Department of Defense. So we're tracking these kits going out worldwide, ships, planes, all the military everywhere in the world. But it all started with that one kit. And that one soldier when I first was a chaplain. And over the years, I came to realize that helping other people with their faith is just as important, if not more important, than being able to exercise mine.
Thank you, Carleton. There are religions, and then there are philosophies of life. And what I'm getting at is not everybody can be a chaplain in the military. You had religions are involved. So our government defines who can become a chaplain and who cannot be a chaplain.
Yeah, I mean, it's a way. So the First Amendment keeps the government from making getting too entangled with religion.
Yeah.
And so if they were to decide religiously who qualifies as a chaplain and who doesn't, that would be unnecessary entanglement. So the method that they came up with to determine the religious qualifications is to recognize religious groups identified by their tax ID status as a religious denomination. And then that religious group identifies a person to say, hey, this person is religiously qualified to serve us in the military.
Yeah.
And so that's what I do. I'm an endorser.
And
I make that decision.
One of the ways that our government has defined religion, there's an existential belief. You can't just believe in the flower that blooms. You have to believe in something, a being or a force beyond yourself, correct? The language of how the government defines religion.
Yeah. So the government, they so the government has a rough time in this area. So that's another reason why they need chaplains. That's our area in our business.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, there's a lot of cool research going on in that area right now. I mean, they're able to, through PET scans and other types of brain scans, measure resiliency and kind of like how hard the brain is working in a certain area. And they've come to find out that those who believe strongly in a faith and practice that faith are the most resilient people.
Yeah.
And they can measure this in the brain. there are scientists who now believe that they can take pictures of your brain and tell you if you're practicing your faith or not by the pictures that they take. So and we realize that practicing our faith makes us more resilient people. It's not a one-to-one correspondence, not for everybody, but generally as a rule, those who practice their faith are more resilient and have more resources to lead healthier, happier lives. So it's something we've always known, but it's cool that the medical establishment is finally starting to see that and measure it.
And knows how to measure it. They have the tools available to something that has always existed.
Yeah.
But now quantitatively, there's research behind it. Yeah. Andrew Nurburg, he's a MD, got interested in it years ago, or earlier in the late 1990s to the early 2000s. He wrote a book with another individual called Why God Won't Go Away. And he was really like, why we've evolved beyond God. Why doesn't God go away? So they were able to capture in the brain what happens when a nun feels closest to God and when a monk feels that that person is reached nirvana, if you will, or nothingness. And it was the same place in the brain. And so it's just kind of built up since then, which is fantastic. But regardless.
But chaplains, we have the religious aspect, but then we also do lots of things just to help with the morale of the unit.
Yeah.
And, that can take any one of a number of forms, depending on who you are and your skill set as a chaplain. I know, I just talked to a chaplain. I just talked to him, a Coast Guard chaplain. I visited him in San Diego. And so to help out with the morale of his soldiers, he volunteers to be a duck. And I'm like, yeah, I might have told this to you.
No.
And I'm like, what's a duck? And he's like, well, we have these search and rescue teams, but they need to practice search and rescue, so they need somebody to rescue. So they call the person they rescue a duck. So I volunteer to be a duck, and they take me out in the middle of the ocean somewhere and drop me off. And it could be daylight or it could be the middle of the night.
Oh.
And then they got to come find me and rescue me. And I'm like, what? You go just hang out in the middle of the ocean, just floating there and just hope somebody's going to rescue you? Okay. That's an amazing amount of courage, but
right.
But he does it the soldiers appreciate that, the coasties, as they call them, appreciate that. So
yeah, good chaplains are trusted.
Yeah,
they're able to carry secrets too. And I know that chaplains have privileged information to a large degree, and just a little bit about your own self-care piece, because we have a lot of things transferred onto us, and so we have to have our own practices, do we not?
Yeah, so there's a kind of two very, very important things, right? So the first piece is that what we would call privileged communication. So that's built into the military law, so to speak. So chaplains, that communication that a service member has with a chaplain is protected communication.
Yeah.
And chaplains have to keep that quote unquote a secret. And that's very important and often underrated. Service members are often scared of what will happen if someone will find out what they came to talk to you about. And so having that trust that you can talk to a chaplain about anything is really, really important in allowing them an opportunity to get the help that they really need.
Right.
And then because chaplains deal with people going through trauma, we call that transference. And and so chaplains need to practice what they preach, right? Self-care and being in a community with others that they trust to be able to talk about things that are bothering them. And to have the trust of someone else that they can come to you and say, hey, I don't think you're doing very well. I think I'm noticing some things that that concern me. So not every chaplain has this, but it's really important. I used to do a lot of media interviews when I was working at the Pentagon. And the number one question reporters would ask me, and these are correspondents, war correspondents that have been downrange in war in Iraq and Afghanistan. And the number one question they would ask me is, who chaplains the chaplain? So who cares for the chaplain? And that was always, it's amazing to me that always bothered a reporter, because they would watch the chaplains interacting with all these service members, but they realized that, wow, that chaplain's hanging on to a lot of stuff. Who does a chaplain go to? So so even reporters would recognize the need for chaplains to practice self-care.
Yeah. And so we have to be advertisers of what a healthy life looks like also, because it comes out sideways. It always comes out sideways.
Yep.
You can always tell.
One way or another.
Yep. It's going to come out. It just might not be clear on how it surfaces. And so, and being able to read that and know that and have the accountability. Yeah.
And, for your listeners, a lot of them are, if not all of them, are veterans. And some of the trauma that they've been through can stay with them for decades, right? And so chaplains are still available. Your Legion chaplain is still available, and there's other chaplains out there that are still available to help them with that today. So that's one of the reasons I still serve as a chaplain for my Legion, is to be able to carry that over into the veteran world, not just the active duty world.
One of the things that's a little bit different about the spiritual ministry piece, you were talking, and I'm like, oh yeah, chaplains and even pastors, they don't have a care plan necessarily with goals. As you were talking, either they walk alongside and help somebody unpack, which is different in our culture today. Helping somebody struggle through their issues and maybe finding their own way and being available with a few responses that might be helpful is different than being authority over somebody. And that's how I've always seen it.
Telling someone that they need to be more hopeful is way different than walking beside them and being hopeful yourself as you're dealing with them, and letting them see that hopefulness. You don't have to tell them that. You can demonstrate it.
Demonstrate it, or maybe letting them borrow some of your hope for a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great word picture.
Yeah. And so thank you for your time. Is there anything that we haven't put out on the table that you think is important for chaplains?
I would just say, the work of chaplains is really important. What I used to tell chaplains is that in reporters, when they would ask, the chaplains people consider church and state there to be a wall of separation between church and state. But in the military, that's not so. There's no wall. There's more like a demilitarized zone, like with North and South Korea, and chaplains live and work in that demilitarized zone. And it's great while they're keeping their head down and doing the work. When they pop up and show themselves, they get shot at from both sides. So most chaplains keep their head down They don't brag. They don't want to really be seen out front. And those are some of the best chaplains. And but it's also why they're important. And I think they'll continue to be important for years to come in our military and in our veteran community.
Well, thank you very much, Chaplain Birch, for your time, for sharing some of your experiences. And so for all of you out there, I wish you well. Thanks.